Back. In the last video, we talked about kind of code school and what we were looking at for how I actually got through it. So we covered things like keep an idea journal, keep a task list, using a bullet journal is what it's called, and then also think about yourself, switch your mentality from student to developer, and look at the end reason, like why did you come to this code school, right? Like, why did you take this step? What did you think you were going to accomplish when you started? And then write that down and just keep that with you so that you can think about it as time goes on. And so in this video, we're going to talk about like the stages, right? So it's a 6-month code school that I went to. And so there's stages that you go through. So in the introduction stage, you're full of energy, you're ready to go. You think that you're going to like tackle everything. And you start realizing like a little bit slowly that, okay, this is really great stuff that I'm learning, and it can be used, and but there's like more, right? And you start seeing like, okay, the code challenges that we're doing, the stuff that we're working on, it goes a lot deeper than just making an image or something show up on a web page, right? It's a lot deeper than that. And so in the introduction stage, this would be like the most optimistic, right? And then you move to like kind of the middle stage. I would say that this one's a lot harder, and this is a part where it's going to like test you like mentally, because it's not a guarantee, right, that you're going to come to like code school and then leave as a developer, right? It's up to you to do that. And so you may start questioning the material that you're actually being taught at this point, and you might start going like, oh, this is really great, but now that you're diving deeper, you start realizing like, oh, maybe the stuff that we're learning isn't as relevant, and it's hard to keep it in the back of your head like this is preparation, right? Like, so you're learning concepts that translate to new technologies, and they don't have the most up-to-date stuff because they're not, you're not paying like $20,000 or something crazy like that. Like, people who know how to do this, they're either doing their own videos on like Udemy, but they're not doing a code school. They're working as like senior developers, things like that. They don't have time to do that. There's not a big enough payout. And so you're learning from maybe former students or people who have worked for a short amount of time, or older people that they worked in the field for a really long time, but the stuff that they learned, it's not the new hottest technologies, but the concepts behind what you're learning are relevant, right? And so as you move forward in the process of this second stage, you'll start to realize like the technologies that we're learning are outdated. And this is potentially, right? For me, this was true. The technologies that you're learning are outdated. Maybe the flow of the course that you thought it was going to be is like starting to slow. It's not exactly what you thought. You're going to start questioning like why you came, things like that. And so this second stage is really hard because you have to kind of keep it in perspective. You're 2 months into a journey that's the rest of your career, right? You're 2 months into a 6-month course, right? Where the majority of the learning and the majority of the growth, I would say, is going to happen towards the end, because that's where you understand enough to be able to be given a task and then be able to go do it, right? And so at the beginning, if someone said like, "Hey, build this database," you're so unprepared for that. But towards the end, if someone said, "Build this database," you could start asking questions like, "Is it NoSQL? Is it SQL? Like, what is it connecting to? Like, what is the schema?" You start learning those like type of words and like what you need to understand to actually be a developer at the end of it. And so I would say it's not so much that you couldn't do it at the start, but it's more like mentally you change at that point, right? Like 6 months in, you're a warrior at that point. Like, you went through this entire program and now you're out. And now you're like, I can do anything that you give me because I've shown that over the past 6 months. During your code school, you're going to transition from HTML, CSS, JavaScript to doing like servers, to doing like backend, to making APIs, to hitting APIs. These are all things that usually get covered in a code school, and the concepts go pretty deep. And so you're going to have to transition from frameworks to another framework, and just continue this process of always learning something new, and always feeling underwater. And so it's great because like that prepares you for development, it prepares you for, it even prepares you for life, right? Like if you feel like you're constantly underwater and you're constantly struggling, then when you actually struggle, you know what it feels like already. Like you're not completely in despair or something. Like you're already prepared yourself for this. And so like Epicodus was cool because like I could see after like looking back that it wasn't just like coding. It was also like preparing me for life, like preparing me so that if at any point I feel overwhelmed, I can kind of like think back to my journey at Epicodus and think back when I felt overwhelmed and how I got through it. And so I think the second stage, it's more like you're kind of questioning a little bit, questioning the program, questioning yourself, and you just have to keep it in perspective that this is only the second stage. There's like 4 stages of like a typical code school, and you're gonna get past it. You just gotta these days you just gotta keep going, right? You just gotta keep showing up, and you just gotta keep doing the work, and that's the key. That's all that's required during the second stage. The third stage, this is where maybe you're jumping into cooler stuff now, right? So you're starting to do like APIs. You're starting to realize like, oh my gosh, like this is how the world works. Like this is how all websites work. Like, and the third stage, you're going like, I understand how all of it works. Like, and it's kind of a, obviously it's not true, but it's like for me, the second I learned about APIs, I was like, I can build a financial website. I can put all these things together. I can do all of these things, which before was like I had no idea how any of it was done. I thought it was created by like like some level of just like magic level skill, and then I'm like, oh, this is just a button, and that button makes an API call, and that request comes back with a response, and then they use that to show stuff on a screen, and it really gets past this point of like it demystifies. So I would say the third stage is like demystification, right? Like you just passed it at that point, and now you're going like, okay, I'm making API calls. And so this website, like Google, the Google engineers, they're just making API calls, right? Facebook engineers, they're just making API calls, right? They may have more complex pieces, but at the end of the day, they have a database, they have some front end, whether it's a mobile application, a desktop application, or a website, it's all the same, and they have an API call that's being made to a database. They're handling the state, they're handling the way that the user interacts with it in different ways. Maybe their UX designers and UI designers are like really bomb, and so they're creating like crazy UIs. But at the end of the day, it's it's like down. You can break it down to like the function level, right? They're all functions. Whether you're doing object-oriented programming, whether you're doing functional programming, or any other style of programming, it all comes down to like a function that's doing some action, and you're making an API call to a service, and then that's returning back with a response. You're using that to show something to the screen. And that was really, just like behind, pulling the curtains back, right? And then I could see like, oh, yeah, no, I can totally do this. And so I would say this is also sort of where that mentality shifted from like, am I a developer? I kind of feel like a developer already. I feel like I could get a junior developer job already. But this is where it transitioned to like, whoa, like maybe I'm not a junior developer. Maybe I'm an actual developer, because like, what's the difference, right? Like you could say experience, best practices, all this stuff, but you learn that on the job. Like it's like the biggest thing is that you have like confidence in yourself. Like your first job is not going to be like you just crushing it, where you're in control of the back end, and you're in control of like literally everything that's happening in the organization, and they're looking at you and saying, hey, solve all of our problems. Like it's not that. So like you don't need to stress about like, am I good enough to do this? Like yes, you are. Like this is what everyone in their career that's worked as a developer, they felt that same feeling of like, am I good enough? And then they did it, and then they realized, oh, it's not actually that bad. And so if you can start putting yourself in that mental state off the start, like when you're still in code school, I think that'll put you in a really good position. So that's what I would say is like the third stage is kind of like realizing like, wow, like it's not as difficult as I thought it was. It's still going to take time. It's still going to be hard. You're still going to have to learn it, but you know that you can do it in the third stage. And then the fourth stage, this is where it transitions from like, okay, now you think of yourself as a developer, or you should be at this point. You start thinking yourself as a developer, but it also moves to this point where now you're starting to think about jobs, and you're starting to think about like what's next. So you're preparing a resume, you're preparing a LinkedIn profile, you're starting to maybe think about writing articles. You're watching more tutorials than you were before, because you can kind of see the finish line, right? and you see this like, the same feeling that you had when you first came to code school, where you're like, it's unknown, you don't know what's going to happen, you're stepping off the ledge. It's the same thing when it ends. I had this. I'll talk about this in a second, but my feeling when Epic Codus ended was, what do I do now? Right? I felt lost. I felt like I don't have structure anymore. I lost all of my structure, and so you kind of have to go through that. But this fourth stage that you're going to feel is like, I've spent all this money and I've spent all this time, like I hope it's worth it. And you're going to start preparing yourself for leaving code school, and leaving this like 8 hours a day of like learning and like growing and all this stuff, to having to grow and learn on your own, away from like the structure and the accountability of your code school. And so kind of what I did was I watched Udemy videos. I learned about like things that kind of interest me, and as I kind of grew outside of code school, I started applying to jobs, like tons of jobs. Like go to Indeed.com, go to Craigslist, go to talk to recruiters on the phone, go meet with them at cafes. Tell them what you want though. Like don't let them just like dictate the conversation, because they make money, right? Like they make money from getting you a job, and so they want you to just get a job as fast as possible. They don't care as much about if you find a job that you actually like. They're getting paid based on like your contract. So if you can find something that this is passion for me, right? Like for me, it was Amazon Web Services, and I did a video about that before that you can watch. And so for me, it was Amazon Web Services, and so I wasn't going to like I wasn't going to go do like front end JavaScript or go do something like Java. Like I was like, I'm doing AWS. I'll do something that has AWS and X, whether it's Node.js or Python or any other language, but AWS is my first thing, right? And so tell the recruiters that when you're actually meeting with them. And when you create a LinkedIn profile, like look at someone that you respect on LinkedIn. Look at a senior developer that's really good at expressing their skill, and basically copy what they have. Like don't copy the words or like the skills, but copy the structure of it, right? Because they've spent years like defining how they talk and how they represent themselves, and so you can use their experience to then help yourself, and then of course like writing a resume, right? So at this stage you're going to be writing resumes so you can actually send it out to companies that you're applying for. When you write your resume, my resume was super basic. Like it's not anything crazy. There's no like flashing or like there's no like animation. I don't have like a personal website or anything like that. It really comes down to like how you talk and like your ability to just like keep at it, right? Like I probably applied to like 200 jobs or something. I mean, maybe not that extreme, but I also kept a like Excel spreadsheet that had every job that I applied to, and it showed the status. It showed what I sent them in my cover letter. It said whether or not I talked to someone, what stage of the interview process I was in. I kept track of all of it, and then I basically put red. If they said no, I would mark the entire row red, and if they said like maybe, or I went through that first initial conversation, I would mark it as yellow, and then finally when I got an offer, I marked it green, and so that was super cool. But like 90% of the page was just red and yellow, and so it makes you want to work harder, and it gives you the ability to go like, oh, I applied to this company, they're doing the same as this other company, so let me use that same cover letter and copy it over. And so if you don't keep track of it, then you have to rewrite everything, and so you can get fatigued really fast. And so this fourth stage, this is you preparing to leave the code school, and this is you preparing all of the resources outside to basically give yourself the best chance of getting a job as quickly as possible. And so I would say that this is one of the most important stages, because you really want to start applying once you enter this fourth stage. Don't wait like everyone. Like there's going to be people that wait all the way until the last day, and then they'll start applying for jobs, because they may think of it as like too much time. They don't have enough energy to do it. They're still focused on the learning. The learning in the fourth stage is less important than setting yourself up to actually get a job once you leave, because you can sit there and do 8 hours of learning every day, or someone can sit there and prepare themselves and like apply to jobs, get their resume looking sharp, like set up their LinkedIn profile, start adding people, start building your network. And that person who does that versus the person who's like still in like grind learning mode, they're gonna get a job a lot faster and probably even a better opportunity, even if they're further behind than other students, just because that's what matters at the end of the day is like presenting yourself, right? So what they say is like you can talk about code, that's awesome, but or basically if you can write code, that's awesome, but if you can't talk about the code, then that's the breakdown, like that's your bottleneck. And so you really have to think about how do I talk about my experience at my code school in a way that represents myself as not a student, but as a developer who could jump into this company and make an impact immediately. And so those are the stages. This is kind of like what my, mentally, like what I was thinking while I was going through those different stages. And yeah, it's a great process. I hope everyone who goes through it kind of finds what they're looking for and is able to kind of get what they wanted when they first started. I certainly did. I have no complaints about the code school that I went to. I think that it prepared me for what I paid for, and it also helped me kind of mentally get to that point where I thought of myself in a different way. And it kind of gave me that it gives you discipline, right? Like after 6 months of constantly working like that, you have that discipline to carry it over as long as you just stick to this idea of like this is beneficial to my career, this is beneficial to my life, and you just stay the course. So yeah, this is the end of the kind of like this is just my code school experience in a very short fashion. This is kind of the different stages mentally what I went through. You can watch part 1 if you haven't watched part 2, which is this one. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.